If you're looking for an affordable, easy to learn strategy in Yu-Gi-Oh! That is so flexible it can be slotted into about 20 other decks, most of them also budget, then allow me to introduce you to a good friend of mine. His name is Alistair, and he and his friends on the other side here will take your budget deck and turn it into a locals topper that will start your journey into competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! An engine consisting of 7 main deck cards and around half a dozen fusion monsters, Invoked is not a deck by itself and can't really be made pure. However, as a power boost to other decks, there's almost no engine like it. So let's see why, starting with the man himself, Alistair the Invoker. As simple as it gets, Alistair on normal summon, such as your fusion spell, Invocation. In addition to this, he can also be used as a mini Honest, as he can be discarded to grant any invoked monster a 1000 point attack buff. And spoiler alert, it's very easy to get both these effects off in one turn from the same Alistair. Honestly, if your deck doesn't need a normal summon, there's few better cards to put into it than this guy, and I'll show you some examples of this later on in the video. To explain how, let's move on to the fusion spell of this engine, Invocation, a card that shows the summoning of a monster invoked as never actually summoned in the TCG, but we'll get to that in a little bit. The key to the engine, Invocation allows us to make any fusion using cards in our hand, which by the way makes it a versatile card in certain builds of the deck. But if you're summoning an invoked monster, it also lets you use monsters from the field and either graveyard, meaning that not only can we use a variety of monsters to summon our fusions going first, but we can also use our opponent's cards, especially hand traps like Veiler and Ash going second. In addition to this card can also be shuffled back into the deck to add a copy of Alistair from the banish pile to our hand. See, like I said, it's quite easy to use both Alistair effects in one turn, didn't I? In addition to this, as Alistair can search Invocation each turn, as usually decks summoning him have no other normal summon, this loop, much like the Sia Dante loop in Burning Abyss, gives invoked decks a powerful grindy engine versus slower control decks. So yes, even though Branded Fusion has now replaced it as the game's best fusion spell, I still say that Invocation represents one of the high points of traditional style fusion summoning, compared to your fancy schmancy contact fusions Mr. Tier Element. And finally completing this engine along with one terraforming, we have the deck's field spell, Magical Meltdown. Now, like every part of this engine, this card begins simple and grows more complicated the more you read. You see, on activation, this card is another starter for the deck, so here's a copy of Alistair upon activation. So far, so standard searcher. However, it's what happens if this card sticks around on the field that makes it so powerful. As long as this card remains active, all our fusions can go off with pretty much no way of stopping them, as not only does this card prevent the opponent from interacting with any of our fusion summoning effects, which again makes Invoked a great addition to another fusion based deck, it also prevents effects from activating when a fusion monster is summoned as well, meaning our invoked monsters are safe from being solemned, trap-holed, etc. as long as we control this spell. And that's it for the main deck portion of this strategy, a mere 7 cards and a terraforming. Again, not enough for a pure deck, but a compact and powerful engine suitable to slot into any deck that has no normal summon. But what are the pairs for a deck including this engine, you may ask? Well, let's take a look, shall we? You see, the gimmick of Invoked is the fact that Alistair can merge with monsters of many different attributes, and in doing so can call forth many different attributes of fusion monsters to help in different scenarios. First up and most famously of all, we have Invoked Macabre, the light invoked fusion. In addition to being a level 9 monster, that'll be important later, with a beefy 2800 attack points, Macabre once per turn can negate anything as long as we discard a card of the same type from our hand. Now, given Alistair can almost always be added back to our hand up after summoning Macabre, it's almost always guaranteed Macabre will have a monster negate on hand, but it's not unheard of for this card to be an Omni negate, depending on what deck you were invoked in. However, what separates Macabre from other negates is that he doesn't just send the card to the graveyard when he negates it, oh no, he banishes them instead. Yes, I'm sure this was done to prevent the game filling up with invocation targets, but in practice makes this card a good pick versus graveyard decks, of which there is usually always one in any given meta. Up next we have the Fire Invoked monster, and the engine's best going second tool, Invoked Purgatrio. A monster with a base of 2300 attack points, Purgatrio has 3 powerful effects. 1. It can inflict piercing damage, an effect that pairs well with another card we'll see soon. 2. It gains 200 attack points for every card the opponent controls, making it potentially a very beefy monster. And most importantly, it can attack every monster the opponent controls once each. This not only makes this card a potential board wipe with legs, it also makes it capable of inflicting a ton of damage, making it a potent OTK tool in decks with other big monsters. Also, this card is usually the easiest monster to make with Invocation using the opponent's cards, because only do we run Almirash to make it, but most players nowadays run Ash Blossom at some number in their decks, which is often the best Invocation target. Up next we have by far the simplest of the Invoked monsters, in Invoked Raijin, the Wind Invoked card. A level 5 with 2200 attack points as well, Raijin is a Book of Moon with legs. No, literally, as effective as a quick effect, he can put a monster face down. It's literally Book of Moon on a body. This of course means he has all the benefits of Book of Moon, from preventing attacks by our opponent, to saving our effect monsters from negations, to making OTK wins with Purgatrio much easier. In fact, the only downside of this card is he's hard to make, with no good Wind Link ones for Alistair to link into, and the only deck that Invoked can confidently make him with being one that is severely power creeped at this point in Wind Witch. Still, he can make a fun side deck tech, and if you can make him, you absolutely should, because he's still really powerful. Up next in our suite of usable Invoked cards, we have the Dark Invoked monster, Invoked Kaliga. A level 4 monster, Kaliga may be the weakest Invoked card in terms of attack and defense points, but he more than makes up for it with one of the most crippling floodgate effects ever given to an archetype. As long as he's on the field, both players only get one effect activation per turn, and also only get one attack per turn. Yes, this card is 2 floodgates for the price of 1 that can be put into any deck without a normal summon. How fun. Seeing a lot of play in slower Invoked decks, this card by itself is easily to run over, but combined with a lot of good back row or protection effects, and you have one of the most irritating cards ever made in an archetype. Finally, in the realm of useful fusions for this deck, we have Invoked Agodius. I probably butchered that name. Arguably one of the most powerful cards in this deck, at least in a vacuum. Firstly, whenever a monster is special summoned to the opponent's field, or this card is summoned, he can pop one monster on the field once per turn. In addition to this card can gain the attack of a fusion in the grave by banishing it, meaning that combined with an in-hand Alistair, it can be a powerful OTK tool, especially when combined with the likes of Purgatrio. However, the card has one snag, and that is its fusion requirements, as like every other Invoked fusion, he requires an Alistair. However, this one also requires a fusion monster with material, meaning it's only really good in 2 kinds of Invoked decks: fusion-based ones like Shaddoll, and grindy ones like Eldritch and Generator. And that concludes all the good fusion monsters we actually can use in this deck. I have 3 other fusions I'll rattle off quickly, but honestly I wouldn't even bother with these because they're not really that good. First is the Water Invoked monster, Invoked Cogtus. A pseudo Towers monster, this card can be destroyed by card effects or be targeted by them, which makes it a decent card in Duel Links with its more limited card pool. However, its only other effect is a pseudo Rampart Blaster effect of attacking in defense mode, so sadly it was never good enough for the TCG. Next up we have our biggest monster in Invoked Elysium, a card that's even harder to summon than Aguedus, requiring a fusion monster and an Invoked monster. Notice they're Invoked, not Alistair the Invoker. Now, this makes it borderline unusable already, but it does have a pretty powerful bullwhip effect if you can bring it out, as it can banish any Invoked monster from your graveyard, and all monsters with the same attributes the opponent controls. It also classes every attribute so it can tag into your other Invoked fusions, but again, sadly its initial cost is so high that it makes it almost unusable in most decks. And finally we've got Invoked Maglina, who's an Earth Vanilla. And that's it. It's got decent stats I guess, but a vanilla monster won't do much in most games, so just ignore this one. And that's pretty much Invoked. Now with the rise of decks like Two Elements, Branded and Chimera as the game's premier fusion decks, Invoked has somewhat become the redheaded stepchild of this mechanic. Honestly, without a serious amount of direct support, I don't think Alistair and his friends will ever be met with threats again. However, due to its price, versatility, and role as a gateway to many other decks, it will always be a great first deck for many players. And you know what? That's not a bad place to be after all these years. Thank you for watching this introduction to Invoked, and join me next time where I go into more detail about the various decks Alistair can help take to the next level. But until then, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.